Thank you for stopping by. Oh boy. Oh boy, oh boy. Hello. Give me a moment to find my words. Oh my gosh. We will be going over costume design. I'm very excited to go and share this with everybody. Um Oh my gosh, I'm shaking. So, without further delay, let me introduce myself for all of you so you actually know who the heck I am and why I know what I'm talking about. Anyway, I am Wimira. You can just call me Wim. That's perfectly fine. Um, I use any pronouns. You can just use they, them. And I have been designing costumes pretty much since my early high school years. And I've also been really into character design since I was very young. I have my associates in art, and I have a lot of audacity. I do not work in the professional field of any art medium, but that's fine. Um, I will be giving everyone just a little bit of time to figure out where they should be and if they can hear me. I'm serious. Yes, it is one of the great things. And you do, if you're on the Discord, if for those who are confused in the Discord chat, you have to be tapped into the actual stream to hear me. Um, I'm hoping that's working. I'm assuming that's working. Anyway, without further delay, let's talk about what the order of what's going to be happening on in this class. I also just realized I left my notes in the other room. Hold up. I left my notes in the other room. Okay. Um, so I left my notes in my other room because all my notes are on my phone, and I was wanting to make sure my phone didn't die for the presentation. Okay. Oh my gosh, I'm losing my voice. Let me pull my mic up in here so you can actually hear me. Anyway, let's talk about the actual order. So we're going to be talking about just clothing and kind of what it communicates. Um, I'm reading too many things. I need to not look at things. I'm sorry. I also have ADHD. I forgot to mention that in my intro, so I am very easily distracted and I will lose my track of thought. I also talk very quickly, so please, if I'm going too fast, tell me to slow down. Just write in all caps, slow down, and I'll be like, okay. The session will be as long as it needs to be. I'm very sorry, however it ends up running. When I was running through my presentation, it was roughly about 40 minutes, but that may be longer, that may be shorter, but then there will be open time for critique and questions at the end. I'm actually explaining the order. Why am I doing this? I'm jumping around. What I was trying to explain was that we're going to focus on clothing and what that actually communicated and all that stuff before we really go and focusing on how it's actually designed. So we have all the ideas what we're thinking about, and then we're going to go into the actual application of like here's actual design knowledge and applying that, and I'll be designing a costume for a character at the end, and then that'll transition us into the critique. And before I get into anything else, I want to preface that I am from the US, so I will be taking kind of a Western perspective when it comes to design. Depending on the audience, which I'll go more into later, you may want to look into other alternatives, or not other alternatives. There might be some information might be skewed, is what I'm trying to say. And also, I will be focusing clearly or solely on clothing. Just fully on the clothing alone. We're not going to talk about the body shape or anything like that. Those are all very important things to keep in mind when doing character design, but that's not what we're going into. Anyway, let's get into the two most important things that you need to know when you're designing your character. And that is your audience and purpose. Your audience is the people who are observing your character, as literally as it goes. They are the ones actually taking in the information, and your purpose is what you are trying to communicate through your character. And knowing these two things will make your designing process 10 times easier. I gotta shake. Breathing. I'm breathing. Um, so how do we actually know where were we looking for when we do these? So your audience is, as mentioned, they're ones who are observing, and when you are making your character design, you want to think of what your ideal audience is or who your target audience is. From their location, what is their culture, what is the way the background they've been raised, their gender, how old are they? Any questions you can answer will help define what you need to do visually to communicate your purpose to them. And let's say, because I think most of you here probably are just designing OCs because you just want to make silly characters. And you might be like, well, I don't have an intended audience. I challenge you to think of what you want your ideal audience to be. Even if you're not necessarily presenting to anybody, who would be your ideal audience person? Are they gonna be young? Are they gonna be someone who will spend a lot of money? Are they whatever? um, but thinking about that gives you the context then to understand what to do with purpose, which your purpose is the story that you're trying to communicate with your character, who they are and what feeling they should give. A very clear set purpose, which could be like you want your character to feel like they're a strong, heroic knight that's been through battle countless times. Knowing how to communicate that to depending on who your target audience is, um, will change things. Setting is huge. It is very important. Anyway, I will talk more about purpose and audience, but I want you to kind of keep that in back of your mind for your character. What is the purpose you want to communicate through your character's clothing and who they are? Um, excuse me. But let's go into actual clothing. The whole reason we're here. Very excited. But just a little bit before we go into that, I want to introduce our model. This is Quinn. Quinn will be helpful today. I am they, them, for those reading chat. Quinn is also they, them, because they're a mannequin. They don't have gender. Gender does not apply. Anyway, Quinn will now be modeling this outfit. And I want you guys to take a moment, observe this, and make some assumptions about this person. All you know is their clothing. You don't even know the color, what it is, who they are, or anything else about them. But what assumptions can you make just based on what you're seeing? Some people might think that they're lazy. They might have just woke up. They're relaxed. They're wearing something comfortable. They may make a lot of money because they can laze around, or maybe that they are a little maybe they can't afford anything else and they just don't care. And a lot of you guys are saying like casual other things, and that is why it's important to think of your clothing, because you're making all these subconscious decisions about who this person is. So how do we actually know what? Anyway, I forgot my point. Anyway, the big thing is that clothing is a choice. Even if you are forced to wear a uniform, it is a choice on how you wear it. How it fits you is slightly that's a little bit more controllable, but um, it is an active decision that we all do to put onto ourselves. Um, and it's why it gives us so much expression and why we know so much about characters and who they are in this universe, because it is something that is so much a choice and dependent on the environment they're from and all that fun, fascinating things. And what can we actually communicate with it? Just about anything and everything. But they fall kind of under, I would say, two major categories, but not exclusive to. The world that they're in is the first one, and also who they are as a person. But the world they're in, we're going to kind of break them down to kind of the major categories. Is the environment. This can be like the actual weather conditions, but it can also show what what kind of ecosystem, because it means what ready available materials are there. So examples of this is can be people wearing jackets in the winter, people wearing short sleeves in the summer, the materials that you're actually making of. And then also they reflect the culture. Um, Depending on where you're from, there's probably constant like motifs and things that you know are standard of whatever environment or time period you're from. This applies to fantasy settings as well, by the way. And then it also has like the expectations. Is there more modesty in the culture? Is there all these other various aspects? It also dictates what groups we associate with them when. Are they higher up social class people? Are they in poverty? Where do they belong? Or even tells us like what religion they belong to. And then there's symbols that people can wear that also signify what group they're in or movements that they represent. It also lets us know about their role in society, which means their occupation, like their job, such as if they're a police officer, a military person, a doctor, a scientist, a school student, and what they need in their daily life going day by day. I will explain motifs in a little bit. I heard that question. I see you, and I will explain it in a little bit. Um, And then it also represents who they are as a person. Do they want to stand out? Are they standing out anyway? Are they neat, messy? Do they care about their appearance, their values? Are they wanting something more practical for their day-to-day life, or are they sacrificing practicality for beauty or comfort? Are they modest? Are they still giving signals about their interests, their hobbies, and all these little bits and bobs we can all just grab from them? But how do we actually illustrate this? I keep saying that word. I'm sorry. I'm not doing a very good job looking at my notes. Anyway, the main kind of things you can kind of categorize it is the fit of clothing, the styling, and the motifs used. To explain motifs, because I was asked, motifs are kind of like as if they were in music, they are reoccurring symbols, signs, things that you see throughout a thing. This is a really easy, cheat way if you're making a fantasy culture, is to design a motif for everyone who lives there and a kind of a rule and structure of what those people wear, because then that gives the audience immediate clue like, hey, all these people belong to the same group and environment. And creating up those symbols is what helps communicate to the audience who they are. I would say so, Milk, yes. um, and then there's the styling. Are they wearing the items as intended? Are they maintaining those clothing pieces as intended? Are they ironing it? Is it unironed? Are they tucking it in correctly? Are they tying their knots fully? Are they leaving it loose? Is it buttoned or is it slightly unbuttoned? And then there's the actual fit of the clothing themselves. Some clothing pieces can say a lot if they're fitting correctly, because it means, is the person caring enough that something fits them, or is it obviously meant to be a handy down where it might be too small or too large for the person? Yeah, sip my drink. My notes turned off. There's probably a lot of motifs you can think of. There's a kind of like theme in what's it called? I'm trying to think. Okay, I lost the thought, but you can probably think of different shows and varieties that have like different variety of cultures. Or I would say like I haven't seen the show, so you may get to correct me if I'm wrong. But in Steven Universe, all the gems kind of have a similar like design theory behind them. So you all know that they're a gem because of that kind of general design preface, at least from what I roughly see. There is kind of a motif to that. Una Musume is a really good, I would say, design motif. Geometric shapes absolutely count, depending on the repetition. I can make a cohesive list eventually of like all the things you can think about when it comes to just clothing alone. Um, but that's every single thing I'm talking about here could be a whole presentation on itself. To go in depth would be here sitting for us for like 8 hours, and then we don't want to be here for 8 hours. So this is just a little snippet of things you should think about. If you want me to make a cohesive master list, you can tip me. And if it's so much high enough, someone just gave a really good example of Avatar: The Last Airbender. That is a great reference for like understanding like how different each town has their own motif and rules that they follow for their clothing. Anyway, it's time for actual design. So we now have all these kind of general concepts that we know we can communicate with clothing. And then we now need to tie this in with actual design. This will overlap with a lot of character design. So if you've ever taken a character design course, watched any videos about character design, this probably will be familiar to you. I just realized I did not fully finish making this this slide. But there's two things you want to consider before we fully go into this design section is the actual medium you are presenting your characters in. Depending on the medium, the need and what amount of detail you need for your design will vary. Such as if you're making a 2D design to be 2D animated, you probably want less detail if it's going to be hand animated. That will not be fun to draw all this detail. If you're doing a 3D model, you might have more detail work because it can be present there. And that's something to keep about. You don't want to overwork things. And then also is keeping in mind design aesthetics. And it's very similar to how we were explaining. VTuber designs are also, I would say, an example of you can get away with more detail because it's usually rigged, not hand animated, but you kind of balance it out. But design aesthetics. So talking about the actual like clothing is that you want to keep your clothing and the amount of detail you add in it consistent between characters. Specifically, if you're working on a project, universe, or even like working professionally, there are rules and kind of guidelines to how all these clothing pieces in your design theory go together. There's a lot of ways you can think about that. There's many examples. Borderlands is an example I can think of that has a very clear general, like I would say, clothing aesthetic that they follow. Avatar: The Last Airbender, someone mentioned. What else? I think there's plenty of examples you guys can think of. Um, Madoka has a very very clear one I very much enjoy. Um, it has a very like specific design like method, and they have a lot of magical girls if you look into their other universes of how they can like, keep their stuff consistent. motifs can be applied different. As someone explained, it's just pattern in French. And so, I'll answer this right now. You can have a motif that's just current through a character, but it can also go across multiple different characters. I will talk about when it applies to multiple different characters across the board, but generally you do have a design method and patterns that reoccur in a single character design. So it's yes to both. And then when it comes to all clothing pieces, there's common design conventions, tropes that we run across, such as glasses being for smart characters or nerds that are meant to be disliked. Or sunglasses for people who are meant to be way too confident in themselves and probably a little bit of a douchebag. There's lab coats for doctors, scientists, and capes for heroes. There's countless examples. I dare you to try naming a few hundred. There are so many, and all this stuff kind of stems from previous pieces of media established, which is why so many members of the audience will recognize these features as representing these certain character traits, even though they don't technically have any true association with that with actual people. But because they were so commonly used, we can use these tropes to either spin the audience expectation or intentionally lean into it. Someone said no shirt equals barbarian. This would be true. Now into silhouette. Yay, silhouette and shapes. This is the most important and big part of character design and clothing design as well. And to kind of break it down, shapes mean a lot of different things, and usually, kind of speaking, sharper the shape, the rougher the edges are, the spiky they are, the more despicable or I would say on the edge the person is, where compared to more round and soft shapes, they tend to be considered more friendly, inviting, and you can see like with the one character that's in complete silhouette here, in shadow, if you will, that because of how pointy they are, they come off as a lot more aggressive compared to the character next to them, which character next to them has all these round shapes and they're communicating that they're very soft and round and friendly, maybe. Maybe they're bubbly. And there's stuff that, and one of the things, because we are designing characters here, is you can be tied to the realm of how clothing realistically functions, but because we are in the fictional realm now, is that we can use our clothing to emphasize shapes. It doesn't need to be bound to the rules of reality and what's most conventional. You can make the puffs on someone's sleeve a little bit more spiky to indicate those shapes, to create those triangles that are harsh, or to make them come off as more boxy. And then there's color. This is where I know a lot of people struggle making their character. I won't be going into too much detail about color itself, as there's a lot of people who've made full videos. I will link them at the end of the presentation and make sure I put them in the bio of the stream on YouTube. I have forgotten to do that. But there's plenty of people who've gone in full in-depth, so if you want a really in-depth look, I will link those at the end. But for right now, you can kind of just look at the color scheme chart. But what I think is more important to focus on is the actual value of colors. Because no matter what color you choose on this color wheel, if they're all the same level of saturation, you're probably not going to feel like it's the right design choice. And that's because you probably have the wrong value, which is the light and darkness and the feeling behind each color. And how we actually control that for good character design, and specifically costume design here, is the point where there is the most contrast in your design is where people's eyes will be drawn to. Usually you want to draw people's eyes to their face or wherever you want them to focus at. Again, most time it's your face. Some people want to focus on their hands, their gestures. Um, you can play around with where you want that focus, but if everything's the same general value, such as they're all the medium shade of gray, you're not going to actually know where to look. So with this wonderful character here, your eyes are most likely drawn to her head and probably her hand that's right on the coat, because there is that dramatic contrast between that dark and light. And when you're thinking of your values and how many values you should quote unquote have, I tend to think about value as there's only about 3 or 5 shades. There is your darkest color, your lightest, and your medium in between. And occasionally you can get an in between both the medium and your lightest point. But if you think about dividing in that, you just can decide where your kind of colors and your values are pinpointed. And then there's texture. Texture is such a fun thing. It plays with how this is. I'm gonna say this really applies, especially if you know how you're going to be rendering your character. But is there clothing made out of fur? Is it glittery and glam and it's been bedazzled, or is it shiny because it's metallic? Matt, if there's spelling mistakes in here, no, there is not. You didn't see it. But texture is something you should think about, and specifically the materials, because material can actually help separate. Because I forgot to explain this in the silhouette category. I'll talk about it here now. But in silhouette, the big overall silhouette, there are smaller silhouettes, and that's usually divided up by color. And so one of the things, if you want something, let's say, that's of similar color, you can make them different textures so they still communicate differently. It does say matte twice. I think it's supposed to be something else. Again, if there's mistakes here, no, there isn't. And then there's details, which is where I know a lot of people get lost. How do you know to add detail to your piece? Where do you even put detail? It's very important. And the general kind of rule of thumb, I would say, if you just want a quick and easy answer of where to put detail, is don't add detail at all at the beginning. Just do your flats, and wherever you realize that like things are either blending in with each other, or if an area is just kind of boring, you can apply detail there. But be careful not to overwork it. Less detail is usually more. I will tell you that much. It is very easy to overwork detail. There's, I would say, some of it's playing around with the design, but the general thing is if, and then also, as we mentioned, with guiding your eye with color and the value of them, your detail should also help you move around your design. So if you're noticing that your eye is getting stuck in a section of the design when you're just casually looking at it, that's probably meaning you need something there to guide it elsewhere, to keep it flowing across and looking and exploring. Let's talk about readability. We briefly talked about silhouette, but one thing is if you're drawing your character and you're designing their outfit in the A pose, how do you keep it flowing? I will talk about that when we get to actually drawing together. So when it comes to readability and you're designing your outfit in this A pose, make sure you move around and you think what it looks like being moved. I have one of my original VTuber model designs here, and I would actually argue the silhouette's pretty bad on it because the hair and the jacket are competing with each other. Now, the colors do help them a little bit, but generally you want to avoid something being confused with each other. And so the other thing too is you want to imagine what it looks like moving, but also what it looks like in a background. So if you're putting them with other characters and you're putting them in an environment, is the outfit still even understandable in the environments that they're going to regularly be in? Usually speaking, characters are the most important part of your story, and you want focus to be on them, which usually means they need to be contrasting in some shape or form with their background. So I find a lot of times, because I usually just casually draw my characters without any background, that when I finish a design or I think I'm done with it, I then try illustrating it with a background, and I realize that this character is completely unreadable. So I do challenge that you look at a background when you do things. Now, now that we have all this kind of just in our mind, steaming around, thinking, how do we actually apply all of this? And I will talk about a little bit about clothing construction. I will also eventually get into making large group casts and stuff like that. But how do we actually apply this now in the construction of clothing? Oh yes, we're thinking. We're doing thinking today. Hello, it's me. I'm alive. I've been here the whole time. Okay, okay. Joining us again is joining us once again is Quinn. Um, I'll be joining over that. I have a lot of Japanese brushes. I download a lot of free stuff. Um, I don't actually use them half the time, I'll be honest. Yes, it is good. And one of the things I kind of think about, because I do design a lot of simple clothing, and I will talk about this here because I just like to yap. Um, when you're designing simple characters, a lot of times you'll look at them and you'll be like, okay, how do I now make them recognizable? And then it is a pun on mannequin, yes. um I got distracted. Oh my gosh. Anyway. Hold up, hold up. I completely lost my train of thought. Oh my god. Okay, okay. So, actually, how about this? What type of character and like type of clothing construction would you guys like to see? I think that's a very good question to ask. And I can probably figure out something cohesive, and I can kind of explain the thought process of how I would go about designing that. Hmm. Fantasy, casual, hotel stuff, character, fantasy, something fantasy. I'm here. I'm seeing a lot of fantasy. Hmm. Military fantasy, hotel fantasy. I'm also saying hotel stuff. In honor of our March Hotel, we're gonna design something that's a little bit more whimsical and fantasy. And so I think that's actually a really good starting point. So we want our character to communicate that they are a hotel staff member, but they're also now in a fantasy environment, is what we're gonna go with here. We've wrecked that ball. And so the best way to start when you're coming with fantasy is one thing about the era of what fantasy you're doing, but then take regular clothing and then you whimsify it. Make Quinn attend the ball. We'll draw Quinn a ball outfit a little bit later. We gotta make them a staff member first. I like to draw with big brushes when I'm initially designing out, so I'm not thinking too much about the actual details, just the overall shape. And so when I think of hotel staff, I think of those like high luxury hotels kind of from like my brain wants to say 1920s, but I don't think that's quite right. But the older uniforms you used to see, like the bellhoppers, I think they were called. Was it bellhoppers? The people who were in charge of the hotel button. I think of that. And so I think of like very much those like high collared things. Bellboys. And so I think of that uniform. So we're gonna just kind of roughly wrap up this uniform here. And I always kind of when I'm drawing at least like formal shirts, I always kind of know that formal shirts are usually made with a lot of structure in them. And so I usually know I'm kind of having a very defined shoulder because there's usually some structure in them. And because there's a lot of structure in them, I think that's actually a lot of like a really good point for making this a little bit more read, a little bit more fantasy, is playing with how structured and how far out that goes. So we're gonna make the shoulders go out kind of dramatic here. And we know this is gonna be their sleeve. And because they're wearing a suit, they're gonna wear an undershirt because you gotta be aware this way. You can't just wear it. You can't just wear a jacket. Don't be weird. I mean, you can. It makes sense for the character. It does. Um, didn't understand the assignment. We're also gonna give him a hat, and so we're doing fantasy, but we are leaning very modern at the moment. So how would I make this more magical? Hmm. So we have a very dependable staff member here. What if we give him a very long, whimsical skirt? Because that's not something you would expect in the uniform. But it can still read as a uniform, and that can add to that kind of boxy flair. I hear charms. Oh, all the charms. Buttons. We're gonna give them kind of like a very, very like kind of very like minimal A-line skirt here. That's very long. And we're gonna give them a hat. They're getting a little flat little hat here. Which now we have a very square, very sturdy. Like if you it looks like if you've tried pushing down this person, they aren't gonna fall down. Um, but now how do we actually go into detailing this? And that's where I think fantasy and like regular clothing starts to differ. Is that it's in the detail work that brings you to that kind of fantasy element. And I'm also realizing now looking at the design, it's very symmetrical, which is a very easy way to communicate something sturdy and reliable, is making it very symmetrical. However, I find that entire asymmetry is a little boring. It's not as interesting. So I want to add something probably on this side, which will I think will tie into our fantasy element here. I'm working on something here. Actually, I don't like where I'm going here. Sometimes you look at what you're doing, you're like, oh, this is garbage. That's okay. You can always click. I'm going, don't worry, I'm not stopping. I'm thinking. Sometimes you have to reconsider what you're doing. We're gonna give them actually a massive belt. That'll be our big whimsical element here, because they probably need to have the item to the keys to do things. They probably maintain a lot of things, so it gives it a sense of practicality and adds a little bit of break, and allows us to add a little bit of asymmetry because it's gonna hang down a bit. And now we have some visual interest. There's only happy little accidents. Don't worry about it. And some people are mentioning the gold trim. Gold trim is detail, so we're not worrying about it. And then I know that March Hotel's coloring theme usually leans green, so we're just gonna go with this kind of general shade of green across the board. I'm not gonna be detailed because if I tried going detailed here, we are going to be here for a few hours. So we're gonna focus on just the general shape and the general thing. I'm hearing bells. We can add bells at the bottom. I think that'd be actually really fun because they're called a bellboy. We're gonna make this a leather belt, which is why I'm choosing the color brown, and I chose a very lighter tone than the rest of it to bring that more contrast. Oh, bellboy, gender neutral, yes. Yeah, no, it is very important not to get lost in details immediately. We're gonna add the bells. I think it'd be really fun if there's actually the bells hanging out the bottom here. I think that's a very, very fun and whimsical idea. It might not be practical, but we are adding the bells here. If I can draw them on. And then I know I want to have gold trim across the board to define all these kind of really interesting sewing shapes we have going on. And we will add a little bit of golden shoulder stuff. And we'll trim the hat with gold as well. Again, a lighter color to contrast with the thing, so you can see these defined shapes that we have going on. And if we're designing them to be a quote-unquote March Hotel character, I would probably take inspiration from the logo of the place, and I'm gonna just do this from memory. Please spare me. But I'd probably put the logo somewhere here. It also looks like an up and down arrow, so if it reads as that, we can do that. And then I would just add a little bit of detail here because there's so much green going on. So to kind of just make it a little bit more interesting. Should have probably chose a different yellow. But this is about where I would think like, hey. And then they have buttons here. They would have lots of buttons here. Because it's a whole button up here. And we'll give them a little button on the side. And that gives us our first costume for Mannequin, with them working as the bellhop. Yeah, we can actually add a slightly darker green if we wanted to. We can do that by doing this. Oh, I immediately went the wrong direction with the green. But I could also make it the entire thing darker if I wanted to, actually. But if I wanted to make these like panels and have like just more interest going on with that, which brings a lot of interest down there. Depending on the character, what you give them their face, it will go back up there. And so that's the one thing with having this detail at the bottom of the skirt. It brings a lot of attention down. There's no more blessings. It does a little bit read that way, huh? Let me try this darker green here at the center. Let me just do that for the entire. There we go. It also very much gives Emerald City, I would say. That is about as much as it goes. But before we can do more. We can do more later. But let's get back actually on track now. And let's talk about actually making cohesive casts together, since we're talking about so many shows. Usually speaking, if you're making a wide range of cast of characters, usually two things you're doing. One, they're all unique people and you need them to somehow work together and visually still be cohesive, or they are way too cohesive and you need to find a way to differentiate them. Usually you have one or two other problems, and it's all usually down to clothing being a problem. And so when you're designing a bigger cast, usually you want to choose a theme for them overall. And this is a very applied theme where it's very like, hey, they have all the exact same colors going on. But in general, ideas and things going on in their outfits, but it's applied differently to each outfit. Um, is a rough example. This is supposed to be a boy band in one of my fictional universes here, and so I criticize them out. If you want actually really good inspiration source for like multiple cast outfits and making them look cohesive, look at idol groups just across the board. Their entire purpose is to make them look like they are meant to be together but still be recognizably themselves. For Hair, who's asking, is that the goose guy? No, it is not the goose guy. Let's go here. I have a wonderful example. If your characters look like this is a problem. Your school students should not all look identical from just their outfits alone. Yeah, questions? Yeah, tips on doing those. I will get into that into a little bit. I'm gonna focus on the topic I am on right now. But if they look like this is a problem. So how do we actually make them all look unique? By how they style the items. Even if there's a school uniform rules, you can still wear it differently when the teacher is either not looking or just around. And because we are exaggerating the points of characters here, you're allowed to play around with the uniform. And so let's turn off these and I'll show you the alternative designs I have for them. It's a little hard to see, so let me actually see if I can make this a little bit easier for you guys. That should make that would make the lines pop up a bit better for you. This is also wearing the same stuff except I added a skirt because I initially, when I made this example, I was supposed to have a base for the skirt and I didn't do that. But just through the clothing alone now, each of these characters are recognizably separate from each other. And some of the ways you can do that, like for at least the girls here, a girl hiked up her skirt from where it's supposed to be sitting at. She was supposed to lower her skirt. Again, I didn't have the baseline to compare it to. And then this person's clearly ironing their pants to make sure they are connected. I lost my cohesive thought here. How it fits them, if it's oversized, are they intentionally trying to get stuff that's larger than their own school size so they can wear it different stylishly? They might not even be wearing the thing correctly. They have the jacket on their shoulder and they're wearing the jacket. It's just tossed on them like an accessory. Do they even know how to tie a tie? It's tied really soppily. Clearly here their pants are not like they've clearly outgrown the pant size that they're wearing and they need to get a different pair of pants. My Hero Academia is a very, very good reference actually. Little Witch Academy I have not seen, but it sounds like they would too. And when it comes over here, she tied her tie differently and tucked it in the other end so it would look different. She shoved down her socks so they would get that little fluffy affair to them. But these are all different ways you can style the exact same uniform, ignoring the skirt, differently from each other with just using the exact same parts. You can do even more expression with different items. Generally, any form of formal suit wear you can get away with being part of the uniform. I have a few characters that apply to this. I can show them later if people are actually interested, but I don't want to stick on that too long. Now, the other question is how do you design casts that aren't meant to be so matchy-matchy? And the kind of general rule there is you need to find something that connects all of them in some shape or form. And part of that can just be the design theory that you apply to them, but usually there is some type of motif going throughout the entire cast, regardless of who they are. I ran a. I actually didn't plan for this to be an example, but I realized I had a really good example for this. Let me grab it real quickly. If I can find it. There was a universe in a tabletop I was playing where they were all students at a kind of a magic academy that took place on a train, and how people denoted the houses that they were in, but still everyone there was no uniform besides they had to have a striped pattern on them that represented the house that they were from. And so every single character had a stripe somewhere on them in their character design um to communicate where they were from. I'm trying to grab the other house here. I don't have very many examples of that looking like right here, but here's how they would all do that. All these characters look like they belong together, but none of them actually look the same. And part of that is just, again, that general rule motif of like they have this stripe pattern that goes across all of them, but they are still separate entirely. And that's a way of connecting your characters. And sometimes it's also just choosing colors that speak together really well. Yeah, no, I'm sorry about the background on this image. I do not have the original transparency on it. This might be a better way of showing you the third character here. It is very much, it was heavily inspired by that, I will say. It was entirely inspired by that series. There was heavy inspiration for that particular tabletop that we did from that. For those who aren't seeing it, it's the Steam Dragon Academy, the webtoon. It's really good. I will show some other characters that belonged in this universe, where this one had a very subtle detail. If I was to redesign this character again, I'd probably make it a little bit bigger so it's a little bit easier to see. This character wore it as a headband, where you can see right here. And I should have one more here. And this character has it showing up on their collar. Exactly. And that is where purpose comes in. Reese. And that's kind of why, at least I went with that. It's just with the darks communicating, I like to make it a little bit more clear, but yeah, it's a very subtle way. I'm gonna close all of these. And let's talk a little bit about actually clothing construction, because I wasn't intending to actually teach how to draw clothing. That was kind of an assumption you can make on your own. But let's actually talk about how clothing is constructed, because that can tell you where you can add detail work on clothing. all clothing, if it's made out of fabric or pretty much any medium, starts off as a 2D plane and is then folded and sewn into its 3D shape. So, like, if you're just making a t-shirt, we're gonna just draw a t-shirt pattern here. A rough t-shirt pattern would look roughly something fine. I'm drawing this actually very poorly. We're gonna just put this as 2x. And then the sleeves would look something kind of like this. And I'll explain this in a moment for those who don't know how to read patterns here. For me to sew this together, I know that these two seams right here and right here are going to go together, and that's going to form our cylinder for the sleeve. And I know there's going to be a seam line, and usually when someone's clothing, they're like sewing something, they usually try to hide a lot of their seams. It depends on the intention, but generally speaking, that's where it's going to be. So you know that seam line is going to be in that armpit area. And then these shirts, like a t-shirt here, because we're gonna have two of these pieces, they come together at the top, this hole here, and then at the side. And we know that at the shoulder point, which is where we had the sleeve shape, is this. I do recommend, if you want to get more in depth about clothing and how it's actually constructed, that you actually spend a little bit of time just watching, like, watch like a tutorial of someone putting together a shirt that you might be designing for your character if you really just want to go insane detail amount on it. But when you're drawing, if you want to add detail, knowing where it is easier to put on detail is easier. And how do we actually add on detail? What type of detail can you even add to clothing? There's a few ways you can add clothing. A lot of times you can put on a print, which usually means you have to press the clothing flat down and paste it on. You can paint it on as well. Or you can also do embroidery. Embroidery looks very different in person, specifically if it's like really high detail work. Specifically if it's also beaded or not. But usually the way that's communicated, at least when you're doing more like cartoony styles, is you want to do a stitch line kind of like this. That's usually how most people will communicate it, because it makes it really evident, like, hey, this is a seam, not a print. I might also be saying it incorrectly. I want to talk a little bit about a jacket, because formal jackets pop up all the time, and I think this is going to be a really fun time to talk about it, is how jackets are usually constructed. You have your front part here. This might flare out a little bit to give it a little bit more shape. You are about on the later half of the presentation here. We've been going for about an hour, and I'm about to be opening this up to a Q&A session, and also for critique for design. So actually, that's a really good point. I will hold up just a moment here. We're gonna go back to scene 2 here. I'll put this up on the screen briefly, but because we are opening it, this is the requirements I have if you want to get your actual artwork critiqued by me. I will be drawing over for my critiques, so be aware I will be doing that. And if you want your name and credit, put it on the image. But this will be what I will be asking for when you put in your stuff. You can start sending that in now on the Discord. But if you have just questions or even advice, you can post them now in the chats. Any of them, I have them all open. and I will start answering them. It can be really specific. It can be also asking going into more detail or depth about something. You can send them in the regular chat, literally right in the Discord where everyone is chatting at right now. Please do state the purpose and what you're trying to communicate with your design. That's very helpful. Other than that, that's fine. You're also allowed to submit more than once. I just may or may not get to it. So don't fret if you can't make decisions. You can choose to decide not to wear clothing or not. That is a clothing decision there. Again, please give me some description about the character themselves, because I cannot critique it if I do not know about the character. I will, if there is no other information, I will talk about the value levels. That is all you're going to get out of me. So, I think I'm going to. I think enough people have seen the thing, so I'll go tab back over here to the other scene. You can send it for a while. I'll probably there's no time limit at the moment. I'll start noting when I'm ready to wrap up. But let's start with. I'm going to start with Moss's design here, because that's just the first one I see, and I think it would be fascinating to talk about. So I know this is a perspective drawing, so it is a little bit skewed. And honestly, I like what I'm seeing out of the shapes here. I'm not gonna draw on top of it because it's the only quote unquote issue here, and this is kind of gonna be different depending on how you plan on rendering this, and that's the thing, is that you have all of these blacks. That they're all just the same shade, and so you lose the shape of the character. Specifically, well, also I think these are wings right here. You're losing your costume, you're losing your character in the muddiness of this all being one direct shade. So if you're to render this out a bit more, I would make sure that these that whatever material your suit is made out of is made out of a different material, or like is reflective or something contrasting the other shades. Or what else I would do, if you don't want to do that and you just want to leave it closer to these flat colors, is I would look at different shades of dark just to differentiate it. So you're not, because again, the monochrome look, it's very striking and you want to lean into that, and I highly recommend it. It's very hard to communicate when it's just flats. So if it's just flats, what I would want to do is I would want to make some of them darker and some of them lighter. So let's, also, this is a really fun tip. If you want like a really dark black, don't go all the way to the, don't go all the way to the edge here. You go to like a very deep navy, and that will usually, when you're building on top of stuff, will look very dark, like I am right here. We're gonna have to make some overlay there. So I'd probably maybe make this pants a little bit more contrasting with itself. And actually what I might do is leave the clothing lighter, and then because the tail and stuff are further back, multiply here, I would probably darken these just a little bit. And the wing here. And maybe these gloves, just to add a little bit more interest across the board. Just so that shape of the character's thing is not lost. And that adds enough interest where you're not losing it, but you're still keeping that kind of monotone presentation. Nope, I've been pinged. Oh, thank you. Thank you for the tip. Jesus, sources. I am going to grab Golden Dew's character here because I think I have some stuff I can really communicate. I'll bounce around as I think about what I can actually say. So, don't feel like you've been missed or skipped. Pass the coin to your speaker. Oh. Valley of then. Okay, I'm sorry. Oh, whoa, whoa. Oh wait, nope, that didn't copy and paste. My man. You can probably, I will stop probably looking at submissions after and here in about 3-ish minutes, so hopefully I gave you guys enough time to submit stuff and I will look through them. I won't, again, I don't promise to get to all of them, but I will jump around. Hopefully you can apply some of what I'm saying to this. So here's your character, and she is a alchemist apothecary who's artistic and not very organized. And she also worships a goddess with a symbol that's a lily. I like that. That's very, very specific. Which had I want to see this color in black and white real quickly. I just want to see what it looks like. What would it look like if I had the correct tools? Color, please. Whoops, that's not right. Okay, okay. So your contrast isn't awful. This is the one thing I have when it comes to people with capes and wings, is that if your cape and your wings are the same color as the torso, you lose the torso and what it's you kind of lose where it's meant to be at. Now there is inherent contrast between their two colors, but I would adjust the torso just so it stands out a little bit more. And when it comes to the actual, I think you did a very good job. I actually like the witch vibes, but I'm also incredibly biased here. So, one, good job. You did a very good job. But let me draw all over this. I'm not gonna draw with an actual color here. I'm just gonna go with a just so we can see the actual tones here. But I'm just gonna grab this thing and I'm just gonna lighten it. Actually, it might be easier to darken the other stuff. But actually, yeah, if I lighten it, it's not gonna communicate very well there. So I think just darkening the cape here might be the oh, that's actually kind of difficult. You kind of have to reorganize the colors, I feel. Because the thing is, you have really good contrast in the face. Like, this is clearly the focal point, and that's very well done. It's just you're losing the torso. Which you don't necessarily need to keep it, but I can see where you're struggling at. The other thing too, you mentioned your character is very disorganized, and you can kind of see that with the shoved like leaves there. What I think would be fun to play with as well on that is I'm also a very disorganized person, is playing with like objects lost on themselves. They might have maybe an extra pocket, or maybe they stick like a pen or a pencil, whatever, odds and ends, and maybe a flower behind their ear, etc. Playing with a little bit more like what objects to show that off. And you also mentioned they're artistic as well. So that could also maybe be showing on their thing, which you do show like a bit of damage, wear and tear done to themselves, which again, I think overall, very good. I think the main thing those are just little things you can consider doing. But yeah, I think the main thing here is I'm losing the torso. You do see the I did not realize this because I was in black and white. Oh my gosh. You have stuff sticking out of the suitcase. I love that. That's actually incredibly good design. Just exaggerate that. Make that really stick out. So you know it's like bursting at the seams. Um, oh my gosh. I didn't even realize that, but you can like really just, this is a very sloppy way of doing this. Yeah, no, that helps communicate that messiness. And I didn't even realize it because it was so small. Oh my gosh. It's really good design. I love that. I didn't even think about that. Oh my gosh. Okay. I am going to be closing the submissions for critique. I will be taking just questions on the sidelines now. So, anything submitted after this point, which I'm marking you at Tiny Jam is the last person who has made it in. I'm sorry if you did not make it in. I you can still ask questions though. It's everything's open up to questions. We have a dragon-themed swordsman by, can I say your name? It's not going to show to me because I'm on streamer read. Undefective. Let's bring them over here. I think that'd be a fun character to break down. So you're saying that they are lacking the kind of impact you're wanting. I guess my question is, what kind of impact are you looking for? Like, is the design itself just like, is it not like, does it feel incomplete to you? Actually, you could, I think making the torso just a little bit lighter could help. And then making the cape shorter could also help a lot too. I think if you cut, because I think the arson too is with your cape, going back to the Goldu's submission here. If you make this cape where it's not competing, it's just, there's such similar shades, and part of that is because you rendered, they're actually very different. The other thing you can do, you can still keep them at the same color tone, but you could change the actual color of the vest here, which might change the earthy harmonies you going, but you can make it lean a little bit more on the warmer side of colors where it has a natural thing. If you catch me out in the wild, because I do hang out here in the March Hotel server, you can reach out to me very easily if I'm available. Please do not DM me for critique. But if you just find me out in the wild, I will gladly answer and I will gladly assist. Please do not DM me for asking for advice, but if you find me around, don't be afraid to ask me. I will gladly help. Just don't DM me, please. Okay. Back to reading about what. Yeah, like it felt flat. If it's what I think it is let's go with method of just turning null gray. So you can see it clearly with how you illustrated here, is that you are missing the level of contrast between the hoping the armor would have more of an impact. So what you're wanting is you're wanting the attention to be drawn to the armor, which means you need to build contrast between that, which you can see it actually really well on the just the flat colors here, but you can push that even more. So if I was to push that, we're gonna just do a fly layer here. We're gonna just make this a little bit darker. Even though this illustration here, you can really just kind of, oops, it's a lot more dramatic than I was making it, but maybe we can push it even more darker. Is that if you push the contrast level between your lighter clothing and between your armor going on, is that that armor will start standing out a lot more. And so I'm thinking I'm later on. So if I was to turn off this layer here, which I've just done that. And also, you said it feels generic, right? To me, the shape is actually very unique, especially like in this drawing right here. I think it's that contrast will help it make it better impact. Even like you can really up it and see even with like just that. Suddenly, I can see the armor, and the armor is grabbing my attention there. This is a very messy job of representing this. I'm so sorry. um, I also really like seeing this damage. Um, mm-hmm. I think your lighting definitely helps, and I think just lowering that, making that tone will help tremendously. But then also, I think one thing you could also work on, um, because what's really cool we have like with this hat, it also looks like it's metallic, right? And I'm assuming it is. But you see this detail work in it, and I think you could build this detail work that you have on your hat here into the armor, and kind of keeping this flowy kind of state. Because you said you wanted this kind of like dragon-esque warrior, right? And so can you like build like a scale or even those keeping those swirls that they have going on there into the armor? So the way I would kind of sketch that, I'm going to sketch this very roughly on top of your thing here. This may not be your intention, but you can kind of build those like kind of swirl motifs that you kind of have going on. And they can just be like slightly raised. They don't need to be super dramatic, but kind of just show that. Or you can make it look like it's kind of turning into multiple scales as well. Um, I hope that is helpful. If you have any other further questions, I can go into that. I will wait for your impact here. I actually like where the helmet's at. It's what I would add on to the armor specifically, because it's the armor is missing some of the depth that this helmet had, and it kind of again it communicates really well. I would say in your like illustrations on the side here, but you're losing it somewhere in the rendering here. And so that might just be like a shading practice. It might also just be maybe you need to define the shapes a little bit more. The helmet looks really good. I love the helmet. Let me like go back up. I want to give another critique here. Yes, it is. Mm. I don't quite have enough information to give you a full in-depth look, but I will look at this one, which is made by uh Alio? Ayo? Ayo? I'm not sure, I'm so sorry. But they have a martial artist with lycanthropy. Like that. I can't speak, I am so sorry. Let's shrink them down. Technically, Gartic Phone is a game, so we're not allowed to stream it on March Hotel, so officially, no. going, so I see this design, and one, I really like it. I can see the levels of contrast playing at here, which is very nice. Very good. Hold up. They didn't do what I wanted to do. Color. And your tension is clearly broad everywhere. Oh, actually, this reads a little bit better in black and white than I was thinking it was. Because the only thing I was going to comment was about the purple that you're using. And this is more, it's not necessary. I think the design is very strong on its own. But because of it being so dark and it having such a unique shape, you're losing the kind of shape of the belt here. I'm calling it a belt. It's just kind of a rope there. And obviously you don't want to bring much attention to it, so I'm not quite sure what to advise, but that's the only kind of brief concern. I think with rendering, it's probably really fine. That's the main thing that pops out to me as I look at that, and I feel like it gets lost just a little bit in design. I also am not sure, this might just be a drawing thing. I think, is this meant to be a charm hanging off the belt, or is this hanging or is this part of the print on the, I'm saying print, it might not be print, I think it's like it dyed, whatever, on the pants, because if it's meant to be hanging from the belt, you do not have it consistently hanging, is the only thing I'm noticing in your turnaround. Is there like, what are you planning on doing with this character is the other question I have, because I don't have those details. I will wait for a response. Hee. Yeah, so it's on that. Yeah. It's new. Oh, I'm gonna put on the same thing. That's fine. Let's okay, applying transformation and then color over it. So actually the point that I was making about your belt is more relevant in the way you're illustrating, but also I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it really just depends if you want your belt to stand out a bit more or not, because it's a really cool, interesting shape you have going on, and I think it adds balance to your design, but you really start losing it in your illustration work. But I also know you don't want to bring a lot of attention down there. It just, you wouldn't like, why would you want to bring attention down there when you have all this other fun stuff going on? And so I guess because it being a different color, I want to draw attention to it, but I think making that kind of decision a little bit more clear might be a way. But that's, I will say that's getting very, very nitpicky, I would say. Then all I would also kind of add on regarding your design here is the intention of detail. I understand where the sway comes from. I'm not quite sure if this is meant to be a water effect that you have going on, or if it's meant to be a like electricity. I think of it as like that. But I think it actually draws away interest from the other really cool visual elements you have going on in this character. So it might be a little busy, and I don't think you necessarily need that. But that's I would say I gets more into my opinion on design philosophy. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, but I don't. Yeah, you don't really even see it in your other stuff, so. That's understandable. Because that was the other thing too I was noticing is, yeah, you don't have a lot of, I'm gonna say, you don't have a lot of, I'm gonna say, that's the one thing when you have like martial artists, specifically when they're so like color heavy on the bottom and they're not wearing much on the top, it's trying to bring that contrast back up to the face is very difficult. And a way you can kind of do that, which with your waves here kind of going on, is that naturally if I'm following this with my eye, and I'll show you kind of how where my eye is moving here, is my eye goes, oh, the biggest point of contrast I'm seeing starts going like this. Oh no, has it glitched out? That's not good. And so my eye naturally goes here because it has a really nice guideline. And then it goes, follows here, and then this brings me here. When I get up here, when I'm looking top, I'm not quite sure because I see this, because this is contrast, this has contrast, I see this, and this has contrast. And then this shape, I would say, is the closest to help guiding us to your face here. And that's, I think, what I would play around with is the shape of the tattoos on their body and see if you can use those on the shoulder. Because this way kind of definitely helps guide me back to the face, and these lines here help guide me to the face, but this one leaves me kind of here. Hoping everyone can see the colors. I'm sorry if you're colorblind. And as I said, environment's very important. That will definitely help if it's contrasting with the environment. So yeah, I don't think you have too much to worry about. I think this is a very overall very strong character design. Those are just the nitpicks I would look at. Specifically if they're just standing by themselves. But as I said, all context design, very important. Let's look at someone else. I hope that was useful. That was my main thing. I hope what I'm saying is actually helping a little bit. Let's go up. To the gala. Oh, I actually have really good advice for this particular piece. Let's open this up. Let's talk about the design made by, what's your username? Say so. I'm saying it say so. I'm sorry if that's not how it's enunciated. But the biggest thing I noted is that you say that they move around a lot. I'm going to talk a little bit because I am a musical theater nerd and we have to dance around and move a lot. They might have not intentionally bought this because they might have just bought whatever they saw from what I'm judging just from what I briefly read about your character. But the way that they add movement for people who move around a lot, I think that's what I read, is they actually sew these corner pouches in the shoulders of like suits and stuff so they can move around. If that's not the intention that you're wanting, you're gonna start, or in someone is moving around a lot, you want to look at the actual wrinkles and folds, because if it's not, that type of like meant to be moved around in, there's going to be a lot more crunching of the fabric in ways because it's not wanting to move, and you're gonna see it pull, like specifically at like the elbow here. It's gonna really pull. I'm gonna draw it on a different line here. It's gonna really pull from the elbow. It's gonna scrunch, and like it's gonna show, and it's gonna tug from those stress points. So if you're moving your elbow up and the like fabric is tensing up at that spot, that's going to be the spot is going to be the closest in shape to the actual body. And then everything else is going to follow that. So this thing's going to be pulled. And this will probably, and it's not going to be as centered because it's getting tugged. If you're wanting to show like it's not meant to be moved in, but they're moving around in ways they shouldn't be moving in. So figuring out where those points of tension, and then you take those lines. Wherever the most point of tension is probably going to be the most flat to whoever is making that tension happen. Or they could also, as I mentioned, have the musical theater thing where they have that little square diamond patch they have under the armpit to specifically have it so they can have full movement. Yeah. So that's what I would focus on is look, and if you don't have any like stains, figure out how you can pull like something taut. Even something of a different material can give you a really good idea of kind of roughly what shapes they should be making. Usually the fabric's more stiff, which depending on the suit, it can be really stiff or it can be very made of more like silky materials, cloth, whatever. It will wrinkle less or more, or they'll be more prominent and more like stiffer clothing. It's going to conform less because it is trying to hold its own shape. So those tugs will be less obvious. But if it's a more, again, if you imagine more like a regular, if it's not like a wool that's been like pressed to hell and back, it will conform more to your shape and body. And it will have all those wrinkles showing those tension lines. And they will help you like, oh no, we don't like being formed around the elbow. And then also, like, I definitely know that you have this standing out because you want this to stand out from the pants, but you don't need it as super dramatic unless you have a very dramatic outfit, which it can be. And in which, if that's the case, I would make it more dramatic that it's doing that. But currently, it makes it look like the fabric is not draping down the body. It looks like it's designed to stand out. So the only thing I would do is I would intentionally kind of make it look more like it's being pulled rather than it looking like it's standing on its own. Unless it's supposed to be standing on its own, and in which I would really emphasize that shape. Very good suit. So let me draw over like what I would kind of do here. So you have a lot of tension here. There's gonna be a lot of fabric's gonna kind of. Also, looking at references for all of this, looking at references is really helpful. I cannot stress that enough. So this is gonna look like more like your elbow, and it's gonna kind of really, this fabric is gonna be really pulling because it's gonna not be sitting where it's supposed to be sitting. Like the shoulder is not gonna line up with where the shoulder's at because it's getting tugged. And usually there's padding, specifically where shoulders are, there's usually, even if it's not shoulder pads, there's usually, especially in like suits, there's stuff there to make it hold the crisp shapes that like those nice suits are meant to be wearing. So that's gonna be like moved over and it's gonna lump probably a little bit further, which actually yours does lump kind of further than it's supposed to be, I think. And as it's tugging, I might move this so it looks like it's pulling more, it's off-centered. I want to look at the design because I keep scrolling past it anytime I see it, and it's been on my mind. Um, it's Kaylee, the hotelier. Um, and you can see their social information on the little thing here. I think they're not here because I had to go, but I do want to talk about it because I keep seeing and scrolling past it. um, and their outfits I'm fairly dressed as like one. I like it. I like the concept of it. Um, the one thing though that's I have questions about, and specifically with how you sewn it together. I've sewn many dresses before. I specifically might have gotten a reward and scholarships for dresses I've sewn. But when I'm looking at this, it looks like she's wearing two dresses because this seam here. Actually, I'm gonna grab a different color. That's red green. That's not gonna help. What color can I put over this that's gonna be actually visible to people? We'll do it yellow. But right here, there's a. Oh, now you can't actually see it. Can I do it in white? No color works. Yeah. But because of this right here, and not the bottom here, I'll explain why I don't see it in the bottom. But because of this right here makes me think that there's two dresses going on here. Um, you can have most dresses, if they're made well, are double lined. And usually if you're putting a circle skirt together, which this is definitely a circle skirt you have going on here. I think it's would be like a 3/4 circle skirt, which for those who don't know sewing technology here, um, or like terminology, a circle skirt is as almost as it says is a skirt that's cut out of a circle piece of fabric. It does not need to be 100% the full circle, but that's how it's done, and it gives you a very usually a very a-line. Actually, it might be more of a square cut skirt looking at it now. Um, but I also realize this is technically meant to be all one piece of clothing. With the level of detail work you're going with, I would expect to see just a few seam lines that are a little bit intentional. I guess where this belt is at is probably where it's supposed to be, so it would be technically hidden. But I imagine that the skirt is constructed from is that I expect that there's the bottom part of the skirt, which this is the overlay, and then they have kind of a petticoat layer S going on where it has a ruffle connected at the end. So for a skirt to have a ruffle like this, which you can see clearly here that they have the seam line going on for it. um, but to me, it looks like they have two dresses on at once, which people do that. That's an actual style choice people do. But generally speaking, that's very warm and very like, and specifically how fitted it is in the edge, you wouldn't want that. So the way you would fix it in one piece is you just have it as a defined seam line. Um, and that's the only thing that kind of like personally bugs me because I find that a little bit odd. It's not a bad thing, but that's the thing that sticks out to me is that I think because you're trying to make it seem a little bit more separate, it comes off as I'm wearing two dresses at once. That's a little strange. But I do really like the silhouette. I like the shapes you're using. Um I would just think about it and then um also I would make sure you're clear with your intention of me like peeking through here. So is it a different cut there or is it meant to be like it's going in? And making sure that's kind of the same shape when you're drawing that out. Yep, I'm critiquing people's design. I'm going through detail. Critique submissions have ended. I'm very sorry, but I hope this can still apply to your other stuff. This is Meg. We're going to look at Sill's design and their character. They look very nice. I like them. And so the main thing I was hearing is that you have trouble adding the what's the word? I forgot the word. I'm so sorry. Is details. There we go. So you did mention that she's a military character. I do not know the context of it, and I don't know your design stuff. But the one thing I will note, I do not know if this is intentional, but I will say because there is the belt going on at the bottom of the region, I'm not going to circle it for because I am live on YouTube. It drags a lot of attention down there because of the shape language it is going into. I do not know if that was intentional or not. I don't know if you want that to be intentional or not, but I will say that is that is something. If you do not want that, I would remove the belt. um I had to put it as quickly as I could, but that goes there. Um yeah. So so you have a lot of belts going on here. The type of coat that they're wearing, um you have all these buttons here, but it's very strange that the rest of your coat doesn't have them. Even if the coat is not designed to be buttoned up, most if you're even if you're just like again, if it's not meant to be buttoned up even, there are still buttons there to make it seem like it could go together. And so what I would do with your detail work is grab all this gold that you have going on. Because also this is a very bold shape, which it actually does help communicate the shape of this character. But tying on all these buttons that you have, I would figure out a shape, maybe even different. Maybe the belt, like kind of like a belt. Oh, I did not grab the gold. I did not grab the gold tone. Yeah, you're so as we mentioned, your eyes are attracted to the highest point of contrast here, and I will illustrate my point here. Oops, I grabbed overlay, not color. My bad. And there's a lot of contrast right particularly there. Even a little bit, possibly more than there is at the face. So. And so what you also look like you like hanging around the same tone, which isn't horrible. But what I would do is I would actually make this a little bit lighter. Also, actually, this is a big thing I just realized looking at your design. Actually, let me go back to the buckles. I'm doing the buckle sleeve and then I'll go into the rest of what I'm about to explain. But I would possibly add like either some buckles or just something. And you don't need to go all the way down. I would just say stick around the torso because that's about where is anyone's gonna do stuff. But you could have some stuff here. You could add a belt and it could be hanging off. Like if I wanted to add a belt here, I could just kind of have it like, oh, it's hanging down here. You can find the shape with like a brush tool here. I mean, it doesn't need necessarily be seen, but having that will add just a little bit of visual interest there without it needing to necessarily be anything different. But I would add it there. And then the other thing is, because this is a bodysuit and it's clearly very fitted to this character, it's very strange to have buttons here. You can still definitely leave them, but it is a detail that, like, what are they buttoning? What are they putting together? Because like up here, like, oh, this looks like it's putting together like this kind of top hat shirt on the top, right? But down here, I'm like, where am I going here? So no, don't shame yourself. Buttons and belts are the biggest thing in clothing. Do not be ashamed. It's just knowing where to put them. Knowing where you put your buttons and belts is the important part. But if I was to remove that, then it brings back the attention out here and it balances out. And it can be just a design choice. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just something to think about. As mentioned, everything I'm saying here is just stuff to think about. It's not necessarily a bad or right or wrong. There's no right or wrong in design, but there are things to consider. What I was also going to go into here, as I mentioned, is that you have this pop of blue up here, but it's not seen anywhere else in the design, but because of how it's connected to the kind of coat, it looks like it's the folded inside of your coat. And I want to mention, like, lapels do this all the time where they don't match the rest of the inside of the coat. And so it's fine as it is. But because it looks like it's meant to be the inside, the fact that the inner side would, I know it's in shadow right now, but it would still be lighter than what it is right now. I'm gonna just put like an add glow or overlay. We'll do it overlay because I think that would still just be a little bit lighter here just because it's because the inside would be lighter because if that's the case. Again, actual lapels do this where they don't match the inside at all. I want to emphasize that they do genuinely do that. But it does bring a lot of contrast up. It doesn't bring contrast, but it brings your attention back up, which is good. And I would argue you should actually emphasize that more. And just bring a little bit more, because if you add a little bit more contrast up here by making it a little bit lighter than it is now, it brings your attention back up to her face instead of down there. I can lighten this up. Just doesn't be that lightened, but just like a smidgen will make that contrast level be like, oh, let's go to their face because it suddenly has the most interest in the contrast between that. Because you have this really dark platform right there, and if you lighten that up, your eyes go up there immediately. You're no longer hanging, trying to like find where you're supposed to be at. They go up. So that's some adjustments I would recommend if you want to, though. As mentioned, it applies, it doesn't apply, it applies, doesn't. And oh, actually, I forgot to mention like actual detailing. So, if you wanted to add actual detail work, what I would consider doing besides all the buttons and belts, which work very well with the fact you're going with a military aesthetic, is that a lot of military uniforms, specifically, I think I'm thinking of like British uniforms, do a lot of like specifically like I can't remember what it's called, but I think it's like roughly like gold work or something. But they do a lot of like hand embroidery work along them, and I would look at those, like what those like proper like uniforms look like, in like the honor like court area. Look at those for inspiration because that's usually kind of what I would say like a lot of military ballroom attire comes from. Look at where those add detail, and that can kind of tell you where to put the detail and how to add it on there that isn't just buttons and dots. If you're looking for other stuff. I'm going to give a comment to Mippy specifically, I believe it is their name, because they They don't want any critique. They just want to be like, is there anything they could add and change? I actually really like. I like the strong contrast in the shapes you have. I think the only thing that you could play around with is the shape language of like everything. You could exaggerate the coat that's on their hips. That's I'm gonna say my quick note to that. Um, I don't have any visual going on. If you think there's supposed to be visual happening as I'm saying that, Shark Scan Be Cute, I believe, is the name of this user, and I'll be looking at that. Her outfit and colors, and she is a Santa's helper who's prone to getting in trouble with her nosiness. Let me look at what Litter did. I'm curious. So one, it's very cute. I want to say this. It's very cute. It's very whimsical. Um, what I noticed immediately is that you have this like kind of nosy character, and she gives me almost the vibe like she might be even like a little bit like nosy or not nosy, like snooty. Like she is a little bit just from the pose alone. It looks like she's a little bit more like she's gonna be up in your business, and she feels like she belongs up in your business. There is a YouTube channel. It will be linked at some point. It's been linked multiple times, but it's somewhere in the channels. I assure you. It is also the same name as my username. So if you don't want to wait for it, the link to be reposted at some point, it is. That. But what I was explaining about what I'm perceiving with this character is I imagine there being a little bit more sharpness to them. I still keep it cutesy, keep it round, but I think you could add just a little bit of sharpness, and I'm just gonna grab kind of here with the red if I can. We're gonna grab this brush because I think it matches the tone better. But like definitely I like how you have like your details with the reindeer here, but you can definitely make that like keep the underskirt fluffy in those ruffles, and then keep that like kind of skirt with an edge and point. Also, I'm so sorry I've not been getting the questions. So you guys have other random design questions unrelated. Yeah. But yeah. Which you already have kind of going on with how you doodled this out. But yeah, I would definitely like to keep it a little bit pointier there because I think it adds a little bit, but still keeping it soft because she's trying. I feel like it's giving me like she's meant to be cute, but also it conveys like, hey, there's something a little bit more going on here. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what I would like focus on is like where can you add your sharpness but have it contrast with like the softness of the design because it's still meant to be a very very cutesy Christmas thing. Um, kind of Christmassy little vibe here, but and that's kind of where I would emphasize like that skirt. And you can make it even like triangles, even instead of these like round petal shapes. I like the round petal shapes, but if you really wanted to, you could exaggerate with like the more kind of triangular shape. You could play around with that. I think it'd be a lot of fun to play around with that. Would be kind of the big thing of like I would say for emphasizing that kind of characterization. Um, in terms of color, I actually really like where it's at right now. I think you have a lot of like interests, and it balances out between everywhere in the design right now. And then the only other thing here is I see that there's these ribbons here. I don't know if they're meant to be untied bows or not, but I would make that clear if it's just meant to be. If they're untied, I would make the shirt sleeve a little bit more loose around the arm, because then it looks like it's a drawstring to tie it, and it's been untied. Or if it's meant to just be a bow, tie it into a bow, or make the strings just a little bit shorter. Because you can make it into a little bow like this. Or you leave it at that and you can like loosen the shirt like this. And if you're doing this, the bows, as I mentioned, I would intentionally stylize them in a way where they're just a little bit more pointy at those folds. So it's a little bit more dramatic in that kind of like building in that shape language. Anyway, I think that helps a little bit. And that's, I think, the main things that come to mind that I haven't spoken about. Also, Krabby Carb, the image that you posted regarding the military uniform I was talking about, that is exactly the type of work I'm talking about. I think I will probably do one or no. I think I might do two or three more critiques and then question. Be done. Question: how do you design an interesting outfit when the setting is more realistic and the characters don't likely put themselves in effort in outfits? So this is my favorite thing to do. When I have a character that I know doesn't put effort into their outfits and they're in a realistic setting, is the easiest way to, I would say, add a little bit of visual interest and make it unique is specifically the print on the shirt and specifically the shapes you block out. Um, is that you can play with the print and shape on the actual clothing pieces themselves. I'm going to give you examples of this as I'm explaining this. I'm just having to find references of me doing this. But you can give interest to simple outfits by kind of doing a lot of color block work and specifically adding interest in the actual clothing pieces themselves. Hold up, I have 4 images versions of this image, and I need to figure out which one is the correct version to show on stream. This is some characters I have that are very, very simple, very casual stuff, but a lot of their outfit is intentionally made interesting with the actual colorization of it. Or like they're just wearing a t-shirt and jeans, but it looks more visually interesting because I have this like half and half going on. And a lot of people, I know a lot of people do this with character design, and it's a really easy thing, and it's really good to do. Is the square on the t-shirt where there's nothing else going on is a really easy way to communicate more visual interest to your just t-shirt wearing character. It is an easy way. A lot of people do, I know, do it, but it is a very easy way to add depth. Yeah, layers are also very helpful. Accessories and things, but again, if you're just having a character who you really want just wearing 1 or 2 items and you're not wanting to layer because you don't want to show them in layers, it is a lot easier to just, those prints carry so much weight in the color blocking you do. Your color blocking is what makes it interesting when it comes to that alone. And sometimes how they wear it as well. I have a character, I'm gonna bring him up on screen, Roy, my beautiful beloved. He's pretty inherently boring, but you can tell who he is, and it's interesting a little bit. I think I could even exaggerate the tie being unbalanced to bring some asymmetry to even more contrast and interest to the design. But you can bring more of that attention with asymmetry. You can, but also just knowing where your shapes and contrasts are. Your outfit, I'm gonna say, your outfits don't necessarily need to be interesting. There's an intention and purpose when your clothing is not interesting. It's just knowing when to not make them interesting. I have a character here who's wearing just basically just sweatpants, but they have a very interesting symbol on them, which brings interest to them. It makes them stand out just a little bit. But overall, they're just wearing clothes. And then also, there's a lot of other stuff that brings interest as well, how they carry themselves. Yeah, no, it is a, I would say, profound issue that we struggle with. Is our I'm not being boring as they were actually boring, but you're boring MC characters. Like, how do you make them distinct enough from rest of your other people? And that is a challenge. And I find that color blocking is one of the easiest ways to try making them seem interesting without making it look like they're putting in extra effort. But then also how they wear the clothing is another thing too. Is their clothing intentionally oversized? Play with the sizing where it fits. Yeah, so you can play with like the size and how like an item fits on them. So if it, like they have an oversized t-shirt, you can really exaggerate that. Or like maybe their pants are really loose fitting or it's tighter, etc. That stuff to play around with as well. I am going to evaluate Tinker's images that they sent. Let me put them in. Color my main concern. I may be slightly biased when I do this critique, I will say. So color seems to be the big struggle I'm noticing here is what I'm understanding from what was put in the note. Um, and you also want them to be matching, but not, well, not matching. You want them to seem cohesive together. And I will say they actually do feel very cohesive together in the way that they kind of feel like, I mean this in the most like flattering possible, but I know this might not seem as, but in a kind of like Power Rangers kind of way, where they each character has their own color, and but they still have very similar silhouettes going on with them. But if you still really want to like carry some of that, you can see some of the detail work. But I still think that you have shape languages going on between these two characters that is communicating the stuff, and I will kind of emphasize show that here when I'm circling over it. We're gonna grab a bright red here. But like we have this like belt here on this character, and you see these kind of belt shapes that are here, and that kind of communicates together. They kind of belong in a way, even though they aren't entirely different locations. They still communicate in a way. Um, the kind of big thing I'm noticing is that you're losing this armor, and they are trying to be like more like I would say thief in the night kind of vibe. Um, whether they're good or heroic, but you are losing all of us. And I would challenge making that a different material, either in your illustration work or a slightly different color. So I would probably lighten it ever so slightly is what I would do. Partially because you want to still keep them really dark. So they're, again, blending in more with their environment. Let me grab my wonderful tool here. It'd be great if I can use my wonderful tool here. Oh, I don't want to go that light. Thank you, please. I'm not going this light, I assure you. I'm just adding this for visual effects. Actually, maybe I should go darker. I think darker is actually the choice here. I lied. We're going darker. Sometimes you just have to put things on paper and realize, oh wait, it would have been better. Yeah, so I would actually make it darker. That's what I would do. So it stands out a little bit more. You don't have to go super dramatic with it because, again, you don't want to bring too much attention down there. But just adding that a little bit makes it a little bit more readable. So it's not blending with the red tone of your brown pants kind of thing. And then when it comes to the other character, I don't know if you actually want me to critique them in particular. As I would do a similar thing is choosing which one's going to be your lighter tone, which one's going to be your darker tone, because you're losing your armor and these really cool cross symbols you have going on with the design. So I would choose like what you're making darker, which in this case I'm going to make the armor darker because I think that would be easier to show underneath. And that gives you that like, oh, here's that really cool detail that's on this character. I can now see that it's there. Oh. Have I gone over time or have I been talking? We're on hour 2, right? Hold up, I can just check my OBS. We're on hour 2. Okay, okay. I haven't gone over time. I don't want to go over time. Okay, okay. I think I am going to wrap up the critiques here. Now, I will go through any final questions if you have questions regarding any specific type of like fashion, clothing, assembling certain things. That will be fully open, but I'm going to stop going over critiques at the moment. My brain is slightly fried. I'm so sorry. I hope that was all informative for everyone who was at least observing, even if you weren't the person getting critiqued. I'm hoping you can kind of help me make it flow. Can you specify how much you want to make it flow? Proper amount. Are you asking more so about like eye flowing across the design, or are you asking about the actual like feeling the flowy vibe with fabric? With the eyes. Okay. So let's actually talk about eye flow. Let me grab a design of my own that we can talk about. Draw details and floats and clues I will talk about. Let me grab this. I am so sorry. I should have planned more examples. I'll be quite honest, I didn't know what you added initially, but I do like what you added, now that I see it. It does help convey a lot of stuff. For Glitter's question. But back to eye movement here. Let me find a design that I can really show it off at. Because part of it is a little bit experimentation, but so we mentioned that all like design really starts off as like a silhouette, right? And then inside that silhouette, there are smaller silhouettes. And it's those smaller silhouettes that we use to build guiding your eye around and the contrast in the colors that we use. This would be easier if I had an on-screen example at the moment. This I don't think is the most perfect example of a way of showing off like kind of how your eye flows around, but because your eye is going to probably be somewhere around here because this is where the most contrast is going on. It also stands out because it is the lightest color in this image. And because we have this big little thing right here, which happens to be the bag strap, your eye's following this line, and they're also following these lines going on. Which, because it is making an N, it makes it a little confusing. But generally, you're going to follow the shape and you'll be like, oh, I'm here now. And because there's all this flowy stuff with the hair, you might follow the shape of the hair and you might end up down this arm. Which then you lose somebody. There's also this tail here. Your eyes might follow this tail and might lead you back here. I'm trying to find a better example of an outfit. I think that really leads your eye really well. Part of this is also like composition and like what you're telling with your character. But the highest point of contrast will always be where your eye is drawn first. And then there's this outfit. Where the highest point of contrast, I'd argue, is this vest here. And then from this vest, where do you go? You follow the lines of the vest, where that's where someone's eyes are going to wander. They're going to wander where the vest is at. So let's say, let's actually play with this person's design. This is a commission I did for somebody. If I want to like move their eye around, let's say I want just solely on the face here, I would probably actually darken these pants because these pants are very light. We're just gonna darken this whole silhouette down here. That automatically brings our attention upwards because there is less contrast and there's less contrast going on down here. So our attention's already moved up. If we really want to even move it up even further, we can really just make this and leave the highest point in contrast right at this neck where it's their face, and that's where your most interest is at. Now, a lot of people will be like, oh, the lightest point, it's where there's the most contrast. Emphasize it's the contrast. So if you have like a really dark point and it's the only like dark thing on your thing, that will also bring people's attention, which is why if I wanted to bring people's attention to this vest here, I could just go to the multiply layer. Hold up. If I can. I am struggling. I can really emphasize that contrast on that thing if I had a smaller brush. And suddenly all of your attention is now on this black void that's here. Because you're like, oh, that's the most standout thing I'm seeing here. Nothing else is that similar color. And so kind of taking those principles we just explained there with at least the value is how you can take them. And then how you can move it around within the other shapes is the detail work or the silhouette and shapes you have in there. So for me, my eyes go roughly around here-ish because it's still most contrast, and I'm following these shapes. And it might lead me down to this hand, and it leads me down to these points here. I might follow this curve, I might follow the curve of the leg. Or if I go up, I look at this, and I see the face, and I'm seeing all these shapes go here. Basically, your shapes should subtly lead your eye where you want people to be looking. I feel like I missed some other questions. Yeah, if there's any more questions, or we can wrap it up. That's also entirely optional. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I personally missed that I would like to talk about. Low contrast for stealthy characters. For stealthy characters in particular, those are really complicated because it's also heavily dependent on your environment. Um, it also depends what you're wanting to communicate with your stealthy character. Usually for stealthy characters, you just want their face, and usually just leaving their face uncovered, if specifically they're wearing lots of dark clothing, if they have light colored skin, usually is enough contrast on their own. How is things? A motif can be as loud or as subtle as you would want it to be. I'm reading this question off of Twitch here. For different age groups, I'll talk about that in a moment. Um, as a rough I'm going to go with the motif question because I think it kind of connects to everything else I'm talking about. In short, it can be as subtle or as much as you want it to be. I'm going to grab a character design I actually like that I did a while back because I think it has a really evident motif kind of going through it. But actually, I will talk about a character that I've evolved actually for many years. This is a different character actually instead. I have a character and her hero name is Rosalia, and I want her in her magical form to have a rose motif. And so I literally made her skirt a rose so it would kind of stand out and still look like it's kind of like ruffly. I've settled down that it's meant to be a reference to a rose petal or a flower in her newer design, which I'll bring up now. I can grab the file. But I changed some of her purpose, so I've made it a little bit more realistic, but it still conveys the idea of it still being a rose petal, but it's not just ruffles. It's not as literal as an interpretation. And then she has her rose and part of her weapon, and that just is a subtle thing throughout her design. How do you manage to limit the color palette? Purple design like hair, skin. I think it depends on your palette. What your limits are. I'll also say so. That looks really good. And for designing clothing for different age groups, what I do, it depends on the context of the story, but I will actually look at like what was fashionable so many years ago, and I will take references and also looking at actual people. Looking at what actual people are wearing is also very helpful for that. But if I'm specifically like working at a time period roughly, I will go back like a decade or so for each kind of how old the character is for kind of what was relevant in fashion for them. Now that's not always applicable, but I kind of look at what age group as well as actual reference point for designing different things. But usually I will literally date their fashion slightly to make them seem like they're a bit older or they're a bit out of place because they're a bit older than like what the main cast is. And let's talk about futuristic designs. Let me go there. So when it comes to futuristic clothing, it kind of depends on if you're going like a very tech heavy interpretation or if you're just like, oh, we're going like 5 years in the future. I'm assuming because you're like not wanting to seem like it's overdone. It, I would say it's heavily dependent on like what we understand to be the future now. There's constantly artistic interpretations of what the future can look like. That's always been around. And I think it's kind of looking at what's around. I think what a lot of people think as like overdone is a lot of like, I know roughly, I think it's like in the 90s, there was a lot of like very, I don't want to describe it as psychedelic because that's not the word I'm looking for. Holographic, I'll go with that. That's the word I was looking for. A lot of people thought like very spacey holographic symbols for their future. I know And so I know that has a heavy influence on what people think of as like futuristic fashion. Um, and so that's generally what it is. I don't think there's really a right or wrong way without quote unquote overdoing it. But I think the important thing is thinking about the grounded reality and the type of future that you're thinking about. If resources are scarce, there's going to be less that goes into it. If resources are plenty and they're mass produced, what are those materials? What do they look like? What do they feel like? How do they reflect light and stuff? And what does a daily person in this quote unquote future life need to look like? Is fashion just the peak of like everything that's all that matters? Or is it more of just like, oh, this is a secondhand necessity? I think that really depends on the future that you're deciding. Um, and I would look to other projects. And obviously, a lot of people like to say this, and I'm gonna say it applies definitely for sure in the fashion sense, but the tendency of history repeats itself. Looking at previous decades and guessing where you want to put, like, you can take inspiration from previous decades, from like whatever era, culture, whatever, because they do tend to take stuff and take little like motifs, aspects, and details from it to make it feel like it's more grounded in reality. Um, Reese, my only question to actually answer your question is how many colors am I limited to? Like, um, I normally work with what I consider a very limited color palette. I recommend most people work with a pretty limited palette. I find it's better you work with limitations of your colors. Um, but I guess how limited is the big question I have there. So I would argue about my designs usually. It's not a hard set rule, but I work with about 5 colors in total. Usually there's a different contrast for the eyes that can make or change, or the hair being different. But then there's the skin tone, so that's 3 right there. And then usually I kind of choose 2 main colors for the outfit at most, and then I have my black and white. I also don't know if Hobbit's still in stream right now, but I'm teaching class. That's what I'm doing. One thing I would make sure when you're choosing your palette, emphasize on choosing, is make sure when you have your colors, because I didn't illustrate this very well. Let me actually put this on it. Is that you really only have about 3 kind of major tones, um, when you're doing a character, which is your I would say your dark, your medium, which I can't really show medium here because well, it blends in my background as that. And then technically you have 5 because you can get your really bright white and your really dark. And so I would make sure that your palette has all of this going on between it. And so you could control where your interest is at. But so when you turn into grayscale, does it look like it has enough color contrast between like your shapes and stuff when you're working in a limited palette? Because it's really is those values that make it or break what you can see in shapes. I think that's the last question I'm going to take because I'm very tired. Thank you all for attending. I was very nervous. I'll be honest, I was very close to losing my insides, is if you understand what I mean by that. And I hope it was very informative. If you find me out in the wild in Mark's hotel, I'm very happy and welcome to give advice, give impact. Also, thank you for all the other people in chat who also are very passionate about costume design giving advice. It's very helpful. And if you want me to talk more about it, maybe you can ask me and bribe me, and I'll maybe do another lesson going into depth about one of these topics. And I think they can send the lecture. But it will be saved on YouTube. It's the exact same as my username. It's very easy to find. Yeah. Thank you all. Don't forget to tip me. I need money, please. I actually do need it. I'm gonna be gone for like a while. I can't. I'm not gonna get straight to all these people. That'd be rude. Bye. I'm gonna turn off my presentation now.